Friends, we're about to begin our afternoon sessions. An earring has been found on the floor. If anybody's missing one, David Milliken gave it to me. He said it didn't go with his outfit. So if anybody's missing this, it's right up here. And we're so pleased that Bob and Hope are with us again, and we're going to give them our undivided attention.
Thank you, Brenda. It's not mine. I don't have anything that matches. Well, before I get started, I want to ask a favor of you. We have these refrigerator magnets up at our display. I think we got these about 2 home assignments ago. We're not getting any younger. These are almost becoming collector's items. Please collect one and take it home with you. You need something to keep your grandkids' pictures on the refrigerator, right? So please help yourself. Oh, goodness. I have really been blessed by what the speakers have shared yesterday and today, and I have just felt so much enthusiasm. I don't know if you have, but there's a lot going on. I remember that, who was it that was, Katie Moran said that she is seeing the Lord move in wonderful ways all over North American Quakerism. I believe it's really true. The Lord is moving. He always has been. He never really stopped. But he's continuing to move in wonderful ways. Katie also told us what kaleo means. Does anybody remember? Yes, it's the Greek for call. And I find it sometimes interesting to see the roots of words. I said I've heard a lot of enthusiasm. Anybody know where the word enthusiasm comes from? Okay, I'm not a theologian. I haven't been to seminary, but somewhere I picked this up. It comes from the Greek en theos. En theos. That's where we get our word enthusiasm. En theos means in God. In God. So our word enthusiasm is coined from a term meaning being in God. Are you an enthusiastic person? Do you live in the joyful presence of God throughout your day? Do we as friends walk cheerfully over the earth, answering that of God in every man? I'll get to that in a minute. But many friends' meetings right now, they're Christ-centered, they're biblically sound in their faith and practice, but they are still declining rather than growing. And we saw that bar graph that Colin Saxton put up earlier this morning, right? And we're wondering why. The population of the earth is increasing. The population of the United States is increasing. Why is the attendance at our meetings declining rather than growing? And that raises some questions in my mind, and the questions are not unique to me. I think a lot of other people are asking the same questions. Could it be the changing demographics? Most of our monthly meetings are rural, but most of the population is now migrating into urban areas, and we're just not planting very many churches in those urban areas. Is it demographics? Could it be that our message is unclear or it's not packaged very well. We're trying to package our message in old wineskins, but the new wine is constantly looking for new wineskins. But we value those old wineskins and we're reluctant to let go of them. Or perhaps we just don't know how to communicate effectively with today's world. When I began as an FUM missionary in 1985, we wrote letters and would send it to the World Ministries office, and they would put it out through all the circulation of Friends United Meeting in the communications. Now we've got email. People still like to get newsletters in the mail that you can hold in your hands, but that's the older crowd. The younger crowd, they like newsletters you get virtually on your computer. They like emails. You go younger than that, and it's Twitter and Instagram and all these other things. I don't have any of those accounts. I do have a Facebook account. I got that so I could keep tabs on my children who are not writing physical letters. They weren't even sending emails, but they had Facebook pages. I thought, I got to keep up with my kids somehow. And you know, right now, it's really complicated to try to stay in touch with people the way they like to hear because you've got to be able to do it in so many different ways. We friends, there are certain ways that we like to communicate. But the ways that we like most to communicate, you know what? The youth of today, that's not their preferred way of receiving communications. Maybe we're declining because we just don't know how to communicate effectively in today's world. Or is it that we don't understand the main concerns in today's world? Maybe we're scratching where it doesn't itch. Do we know where it's itching so we know where to scratch? Could it be that the gospel that we're preaching is not the kind of good news that people are looking for? We're preaching the gospel of salvation, but so many people are wondering how they're going to hold down a job as a single parent, get their kid to school, pick their kid up from school, or they're worried about the safety of their kids in school, or they're wondering how they're going to feed their kids. And those of you who've ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy, you know it's the most urgent things that people focus on first. And oftentimes the message of salvation is not the good news that people are looking for. If we answer the more urgent needs, maybe they'll be in a position to listen to some spiritual message. But do we know where they're itching? Could it be that the unchurched around us perceive in us more judgment than love? I know some places that's true. I know a pastor who went on sabbatical, and he was traveling around in Alaska, and he hadn't shaved, so he's really scruffy looking. And he walked into just some nondescript cafe, which was apparently a favorite haunt of the local people because there's hardly any place to sit. He sat down at the only table remaining, a table for two, the only table left. He sat down, and another young lady came in, and that was the only seat left. And so that's where she said, "Do you mind if I sit here?" "Oh, no, go right ahead." She didn't know he was a pastor. I mean, he wasn't wearing, a clerical collar or a collar or a pastor on his forehead, but he had a listening ear. And before long, she found herself telling him her story. Grew up in a Christian family, but got pregnant out of wedlock and just felt the rejection of her church, even of her parents. Took her child and just went away, try to figure out how I can live. Nobody wants me. Found a job somewhere in Alaska, but feeling really disconnected from the people that should have meant the most to her. And she's telling this to this pastor. She doesn't know he's a pastor. And at some point, and she's talking about all the issues she's dealing with, and then she needs help. She doesn't know where to find it. And he asks her, have you ever thought of, you grew up in a church. Have you ever thought of finding a church that you could just be a part of here? And she said, a church? She said, why would I do that? I already feel bad enough about myself. There are a lot of people that won't come through our doors because they expect to meet judgment, because they've never really met grace in the church. Maybe there are some hidden barriers, or at least barriers that are hidden to us. We expect that after they've been coming for a while, they're going to be like us. Friends, we just heard it this morning. The days of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Quakerism are over. They're behind us. Okay? Friends have a message that is resonating in a lot of different cultures in different places of the world. And Christ himself is raising up fellowships in those places. They may come under the name of Friends or they may not. God's truth is God's truth, whether it's proclaimed by a Quaker or anybody else. And when they recognize it, it resonates. I've met some people that are more Quakerly, but they don't wear that label, than some friends that I've met. But if we expect them to be like us, our churches won't grow. We'll get to that in a bit. I don't pretend to have all the answers, and probably why our numbers continue to decline may be a combination of many of these things. But I do believe that the darker the world becomes, the brighter the light shines. This may not be very Quakerly, but is there an amen out there? The darker the world, and it's getting darker, the darker the world becomes, the brighter the light shines. I believe that Christ's body is designed for growth, and I mentioned this last evening. And last evening we looked at Paul's prescription for growth. The last point I mentioned, though, was that being connected to Christ also leads us to be connected to those around us who don't know him. Why? Because Christ himself is still seeking the lost and the broken and the hurting. His heart yearns for them. And he wants to reach them through those who are already a part of his body. So today, and with Hope's help from time to time, she's behind me, but not yet. Today, I'd like to share some thoughts about pursuing a vision for ministry. Last evening was a vision for growth. I'd like to share some thoughts about a vision for ministry. Many of these thoughts that I hope to share will raise more questions than answers. But I'd like to begin by looking at a scripture that we're all very familiar with, Matthew 28, verses 18 to 20, the Great Commission. We've heard that many times. We've heard so many missionary speakers talk about that. And I don't want to, well, I won't call it beating a dead horse. It's not a dead horse, but I don't want to go over what so many others have gone over. But Jesus begins by telling his disciples, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given unto me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. And that therefore is there for a reason. What Jesus has just said. All authority in heaven and on earth. Jesus has been given the right to rule in heaven and on earth. And standing in that right to rule, he now tells his disciples, I, who have been given the right to rule, am commissioning you for a special work. And that is to go out and make disciples of all nations. Missions, therefore, is at the heart and soul of following Jesus. If we are his body, we are following him. He has commanded us with the authority, the right to rule that he has been given from his Father. And he has said, go. Now, going doesn't mean that everybody has to go to Kenya or Asia or wherever. Sometimes he's just saying, go to your neighbor across the street. We heard a story about that this morning, didn't we? Okay. It is a core that is missions, reaching out and teaching others to become his disciples, is a core, vital, fundamental, and essential focus of what the church is intended to do. Aside from, of course, ministry and worship and discipleship, training up its own members, but going out and carrying that message. We talk about winning souls to Jesus Christ. I don't like that term very much because this isn't a game with winners and losers. I prefer to think about it as wooing, not winning. Wooing souls to Jesus Christ. Any of you ever heard this archaic phrase, pitching woo? I mean, that was an archaic phrase when I was a kid, pitching woo. It's what you did when you were trying to win the heart of someone else because you wanted to spend the rest of your life with them. Jesus wants to pitch woo to our neighbors, our colleagues, our coworkers, the people around us who are depressed, who are anxious, who are suicidal, who are alone in the world, whatever it is. Jesus wants to pitch woo to them through us, wooing the world to Christ. Kenyan friends, and I'm so glad that we have a whole contingent of them from Baltimore here, are now engaged in many ministries, including evangelism and missions outreach, health and education ministries, leadership development, peace building, humanitarian support, and so forth. And by the way, you all know that Kenya recently had its elections on the 9th of August, last Tuesday. By law, they're supposed to release the results by Monday. And all Kenyanites are looking at Monday and wondering what's going to happen because there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. So we'll pause right here and just ask you to remember to pray for Kenya between now and Monday and the days following. Pray for peace. All right? Thank you. Kenyan missionaries are serving in refugee camps in Tanzania, in Uganda, in Eastern Congo, and even in Belize. And you, friends, are supporting. I think that you've got Belize in your mission budget, isn't it? Yeah. They've got that vision. The original vision of Friends was of a great people to be gathered. And this was to be accomplished by walking cheerfully over the world, answering that of God in every person. Do we still hold on to this vision? Which do we spend more time thinking about? And I think all of us would say, yes, we do. But when we sit in our committee meetings and monthly meetings and whatever it is, what do we spend more time thinking about? How we are going to survive as a meeting, or how we are going to pitch the woo of Jesus into the world around us? Well, let's assume that our primary calling is still to gather people to Christ. I believe we would all say amen to that. That is our primary calling. As friends, we are to gather people to Christ. So who is God calling us to gather today? And do we have a plan to reach them? Have we thought about it? How are we going to reach the people for whom the heart of Jesus yearns? Uganda Friends Church has come up with a strategic plan. I just read about this on Wednesday in the Friends United meeting e-news, August 10th. I was really heartened by this. And I just want to, if you'll allow me, just read to you a little bit about what Uganda Yearly Meeting, actually now they're calling it Uganda Friends Church. What Uganda Friends Church says that it's been doing. This is from Alfred Wasike, who is the General Secretary of Uganda Friends Church. Alfred writes, "We are working on the first ever Uganda Friends Church strategic plan for 2023 to 2027, 5-year strategic plan. The blueprint has been presented to the executive and general boards, critically examined, approved, and is to be presented to the annual general conference, August 24 to 28. That's coming up, friends. Let's pray for Uganda Friends Church. At Mbali Friends Church, where the annual general conference will be, they're presenting it for ratification. We've done a detailed situational analysis of our past and present. Have we done that? We have thoroughly explored our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This is a SWOT analysis. I don't know how many of you have heard about this. I'll be glad to explain it later, not right now. We've done honest soul searching on what we need for the future of the Uganda Friends Church. Our strategic plan focuses on improving the performance of the Uganda Friends Church by streamlining 5 thematic pillars, and they've identified these: administration, evangelism, education, medical, and industry. We are striving to ensure that our members increase in number, in spiritual nourishment, and in economic empowerment to power the church. Our pastors and secretariat should be well cared for at both the personal and missional work levels. Our plan aims to equip our leaders and members for effective and efficient service. They have a vision, and they've thought and prayed long and hard about it. And they believe they know where Christ is calling them and how they're going to get there. Do we have such a plan? Who is God calling us to gather today? Well, I have asked Hope if she could maybe share a few, just briefly, some statistics about who is around us in North Carolina.
One of the things that we do when we teach our students is we give them a task of how to map your community. So when we try to think, who is God calling us to go to, we need to know who's out there and what are the needs. What do we need to think about when we look at our community? I won't go into the mapping exercise, but it's a very interesting one to do. So we're just going to do a few brief things. We looked up on the internet, okay? Something any of you can do, and you could probably do it better than I have done it. Who's out in our community? In North Carolina, 22% of us are under the age of 18, okay? In North Carolina, not in this meeting. But, and as we look at this, we compare ourselves to what's in North Carolina. Do we look anything like our communities? And there's 17% that are over the age of 65. If we look at ourselves in our churches, do we reflect that age range? In race, 62% of North Carolina is white, 10% is Hispanic or Latino, 22% Black, and 6% others. Here's an interesting one. Foreign-born immigrants are 8%. And it was interesting to look at specific, because we're going to be with Rocky River Friends, and I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry, David. But in Siler City, 46% of the population is Hispanic in one small community. Wow, that was kind of stunning. So we have these pockets of communities among us. In our homes, 12% of us are living in homes where English is not the first language they speak. They speak some other language besides English. 12%. When we think of healthcare, especially if we think of people under 65, 9% of North Carolinians are disabled. 13% have no health insurance. When we look at our economy, 13% of North Carolinians are living in poverty. So those are just some basic demographics. We can go into some more social ones, which we will do in a minute.
Yeah, so who's out there that needs to know Jesus? So that's just a glimpse of those around us. 13% that don't speak English at home. Are we able to reach them with the love of Jesus Christ? Can we pitch the woo of Jesus to them? Do we feel called to do that? Or does that feel somehow threatening to us? Who is Jesus calling us to love into his family? Well, we're also called not just to gather people together, but do it by walking cheerfully over the world, answering that of God in every person. Well, what is it that we're answering? That of God in every person. People have deep, deep needs that are crying out for answers. Do we understand what those needs are? So again, I'd like to ask Hope to share some statistics about some of the things that may help elevate into our awareness the circumstances that are daily facing the lives of people around us who need to know Jesus.
Yeah, so in our midst are families in North Carolina. Family is the basic unit, the first one that God created and is the foundation. Well, actually, there's a little bit of good news in this. The divorce rates have actually dropped from 5.1 per 1,000 people in 1990 to 2.8 per 1,000 people in 2020. We feel pretty good about that. That sounds good. But how many of those are actually just they didn't bother with the divorce? And they're saying, yet first marriages still have 40 to 50% likelihood of ending in divorce. 40 to 50%. That's quite a lot. And only 50% of North Carolinian spouses are living together. They're living apart. Oh, wow. What does that have to do? How does that impact our society? Well, in the home, the basic unit, the product is children. So, in Guilford County in 2020, how many of you are from Guilford County? Do we have anybody here from Guilford County? Few of you. Okay, it's not very far from here, and it's not so different in all your other counties, so don't just pat yourself on the back. It shows that 40.5% of the children between the ages of 5 and 18 come from single parent homes. That's quite a lot of kids that are living with only one parent, not both. I don't know how you think about that. Single father households represent 8.1% of all North Carolina households in 2017. But in 1960, there were only 1.1% that had single father households. So that's a change in how we look at parenting. So fathers are, in some places, taking more of a role. I don't know how we think about that. 2020, 59.1% of the homes in North Carolina were headed by married couples. Well, it's good to have married couples, but that's only a little over half. Okay, 22.2% were headed by a single mother. So that's what it looks like for the children in their home situation. If we look at youth, 24% of the youth population in the United States is under the age of 18, 22% in North Carolina. 40% of these children live in low-income families. Okay, what does that mean? What are the ramifications of that? And they have done studies to look at these children are much more likely to have had sex before the age of 16. They're much more likely to become a gang member. They're much more likely to run away and get involved in violent behavior or theft. 7% of young women from low-income families have a child by the age 18. So these are the people in our communities. In North Carolina, 1 in 9 children between the ages of 16 to 24 years old are neither working or in schools. What are the ramifications of that? Well, what are these kids doing? What are they doing? Where are they? What are they engaged in? And so that's where we have some of our other statistics. North Carolina ranks number 22 in the USA for highest teen pregnancy rates. 8.4% of teen girls report they were forced to have sexual intercourse against their will. How many of us in our church even talk about those issues with our youth? Are we trying to help them learn how to think about themselves and sexual behavior? 12.5% of North Carolina high school students report binge drinking in 2019. 39.4% said they've ever used marijuana, and 7.5% said they tried it for the first time before the age of 13. Wow, are we talking to our kids? What's our children's ministry thinking about? What are we talking? How are we preparing our kids? 22% of these kids said they were offered or sold illegal substances on school property. Oh, do we have teachers in here? And are we engaging with our schools? 71% of young adults and 50% of teens report being exposed to pornography at least once a week, and the majority through online videos. Our kids have a lot of access to that. 15.9% carried a weapon. This is teenagers. We're not talking about the whole population, teenagers. 15.9% carried a weapon in the 30 days prior to a survey done a couple years ago. In another survey, 36.3% teens reported feeling sad or hopeless nearly every day for 2 or more weeks in the previous 12 months, and 9.7% actually attempted suicide in the previous 12 months. Are there teenagers in your community that need the good news? We have more, but I don't know if we should do more. That's maybe enough to wrap our minds around.
I mean, my brain fogs over with too many numbers, but I hope this helps you to realize how much deep need there is around us. 9.7% of high school youth having attempted suicide in North Carolina? People, people don't do that unless they are feeling incredibly deep pain. We have people all around us who are experiencing deep, deep pain and they don't know how to deal with it. People need the love of Jesus. They know they need something, but they don't know that's what it is that they need. So what do they go looking for to find the answer to this deep need that they may not even be able to identify or describe? Drugs and alcohol, video games, violence, gang membership, anything to get accepted. They're looking, but they're looking in the wrong places. And Jesus wants to woo them into his family through us. So let's assume that Christ has already given us all that we need to enable us to be faithful to his call. So what are some of those things that we've been given? Well, first of all, there's the everlasting gospel of Jesus Christ. That there is one, even Christ Jesus, who can speak to your condition. But for the people who are contemplating suicide, that may not be the good news they're looking for. They're looking for an answer to that pain. And they may not even believe that that will relieve their pain. Gospel, the everlasting gospel. Gospel means good news. So what is good news? For the hungry, it's being fed. For the sick, it's being healed. For the person in pain, it's to have that pain relieved. Do we understand what good news looks like for those around us who are suffering and hurting? Have we ever asked Christ to show us what good news looks like for the people that he wants us to reach in his name and for his kingdom's sake? Have we prayed over that? Yesterday I said proclamation without demonstration equals defamation. The Great Commission calls us to train others, disciple others to observe all that he has commanded. Are we doing that ourselves? Most of us are observing some of what he has commanded. I certainly cannot stand before you in good faith and say, I am constantly observing all that he has commanded me. I can't on my own. That's why I have to be connected to my head. We all do. Besides the gospel, he's given us his Spirit to dwell within us because he knows that we can't do it on our own. We can only do it in him. His Spirit empowers us, the inward Christ, to live Christ-like transformed lives, responding in obedience as Jesus Christ himself would respond to the needs of those around us. He doesn't give us his Spirit so that we can feel proud about ourselves. He gives us his Spirit so that we can be empowered to be his presence in the darkness of the world around us. Are we walking in the light of that Spirit? A long time ago, I read a book by Bob Moffat called, not the same Moffat as Moffat Bible College, called If Jesus Were Mayor. And it posed a question that has stuck with me ever since. Not if Jesus were president, if Jesus were mayor. So it's looking at the local community. If Jesus were the mayor of my small town and invited me to walk around my small town with him, just to take a walk. And as we walked around our small town, what would Mayor Jesus see that he would want to do something about? that unsafe water supply that people are drawing water from for daily consumption. The passed out alcoholic in the ditch who has resorted to alcohol because nothing else will dull his pain. The garbage dump at the edge of town that all the children are playing in and getting stuck with unsafe needles or exposed to who knows what kinds of diseases. The family across the street that is experiencing marital strife, and the wife is being beaten regularly by the husband but is too ashamed to let anybody know about it. The children who can't go to the village school because they don't have a school uniform to wear. What would Mayor Jesus see that he would want to do something about in my village? And is what would touch the heart of Mayor Jesus touching my heart? Is it touching the heart of his church? He has given us his Spirit. And we have done some prayer walks from time to time. And we've just asked the Lord to show us, Lord, what do you see? How do you want us to pray? How do you want us to minister your grace and love in this community? Do we do that? He's also given us the conviction as friends that a true relationship with Jesus Christ, not a professed relationship, a true, living, real, authentic relationship with Jesus Christ changes everything. Because as we are walking in him, it changes us from within, and it changes then how we see the world around us. We teach a course in the biblical issues in HIV and AIDS to our Moffat students in Kenya, and we begin just looking at the heart of God. What are God's core values? What are the things that really are just a part of his nature, of who he is, that he values so much? Forgiveness, grace, mercy. You can come up with a nice, good list of them. And then we look at the life of Jesus. Jesus told Philip, "He who has seen me has seen the Father." Jesus is the representation of what the nature and character of God looks like when it's lived out in human flesh in a world that is not perfect. It's broken. It doesn't work. Sometimes you have to make a choice and neither choice is good. How would Jesus live that out? We look at Jesus so that we can understand the heart of the Father. Now he's poured his Spirit into us as the church. Do we reflect Jesus, who is the revelation of God, into the world around us? Well, since 1985, Hope and I have been walking, sometimes not so cheerfully, over the world, answering that of God in as many people as Christ has enabled us to do so. And our theme has been Luke 9, verse 2, and that Luke 9 chapter was referred to earlier this morning. He sent them to preach the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. And in the process of doing this and trying to be as faithful as we know to be, we've learned a lot. We still have a lot more to learn. But I would like to share with you 4 principles in the time remaining. We're going to have to really put our running shoes on. 4 principles for effective ministry. I'm sure there's more than this, but I'd like to highlight these 4. And the first is that prayer is essential for vision, and it's foundational for empowerment. And I've asked Hope if she can share quickly a story that illustrates these principles.
Yeah, the quickly is the hard part. We were in Zambia and heavily impacted by HIV, and we worked in a very rural community. The whole district was 86,000 people, and I was the TB officer. We had a discipleship training program, but the Lord moved us to Nairobi, and now we had a city of 4 million people, and we were given the task of start a project called Hope for AIDS. Wow. And we do look at numbers, and as you can tell, and we knew the statistics, and we spent time talking to some people. We had stories, and it's like, wow, what on earth do we do with this? We're just two people, and we had another colleague we could bring into it. That made us three. And it was just daunting. So, where do you begin? How do you begin? What do we need to do? Well, we felt like from our experiences, actually, what we had been taught 20 years before in Lugulu, prayer, prayer. So we began to ask God together, and we decided to call some other people in to pray with us. There had been a small prayer meeting that had been going on for a while. Just a few people from our office said, okay, let's take this prayer to the community. We called together other churches, and we would move it around from church to church to take it out of the mission compound, so it's not an ownership of the mission, but it's everybody's. And so, yeah, where do we begin? And we were invited in one church, and the pastor got excited and interested. He said, and I said, it'd be nice if we had music. We're in Kenya and we love music. And when we pray, it helps us to get ourselves into worship. So he offered us the services of his worship pastor, and so who was very good at music and very gracious in coming. I don't think he would have attended if he hadn't been asked by his senior pastor to come. But as he heard what was going on, so we were thinking, well, what's really happening in these prayer meetings? We were not many, we were small, just a few people here and there. And every month, it was a different group of people. We would pray for 2 or 3 hours and focus on different kinds of aspects of HIV. There was a monthly prayer guide that we put out, a daily prayer guide put out once a month, and each month a different kind of focus, an area of HIV. And so it was a way to kind of provide a little bit of education. So we would pray based on these things that we were studying, and how is that going to impact our community. So you wonder what's happening in this prayer meeting. But this music pastor, his name was Manasi, um, after a while, he started really getting engaged, and he became one of the more interested people and helped us to go on with that. We didn't know the story, but he kept drawing closer and closer. He says, please, finally, would you come to my home in Western Kenya? It's not far from Kakamega, um, where there's a group of people that really need to know something, because recently a group of a volunteer group from overseas had come to do a voluntary testing program for HIV in their community without including the Ministry of Health or local people. So yes, they did. They rolled it out. They had tested a lot of people, but they didn't speak the language or understand, and they didn't really have a full understanding of HIV, so they didn't provide any counseling, and they didn't connect them to anybody. So they found all these people who were HIV positive. They learned for the first time they're positive and had no idea what to do with that. And it was so, and they'd heard all these terrible stories, so people were just really, they just didn't know what to do. Because this pastor had been coming to this meeting in Nairobi, he said, I want to do something to help my people. I've seen now we can do something. So we came out and spent a little bit of time there. So that was one little flame. They started a support group, and we did an awareness training, and I could tell you stories from that. But what we learned from that is that our prayer group, and Chris, I don't know if she's here now, there she is, told us about their prayer group. You don't know where it's going, and it may not result in a big project, and it may not be God says, oh, do this, and you're going to impact the nation, or you're going to impact this big thing. What we found, at least in ours, is the faithfulness every month, and it's an ongoing thing. And sometimes, some months, you think, Well, we had a prayer meeting. We don't know what happened there. Was there anything good? But out of that, slowly by slowly, little people would come and pop into our prayer meeting, and we didn't know where they were going. And they took little flames that ignited in different parts of Kenya. They happened to be visiting somewhere and came to the prayer meeting because they saw the advertisement or heard about it in a church or something. And they would come and they would just go back and do something or find a way to connect. So little things happened. So these little sparks happened. And it wasn't a big thing, um, but you never know what prayer can do because I believe God is just waiting for us to ask Him. And once we do start asking, He'll do things we couldn't imagine. I didn't have any idea that this prayer meeting would start things in like 4 or 5 different places in Kenya.
Thank you, Hope. How much time do we spend praying and seeking the Lord's direction for the ministries that He's calling us to? The next principle for effective ministry is that we are called to obedience, not to results. And I'd like to ask Hope to share a story about that.
When we were in Zambia, the early 2000s, it was in our district, it was estimated that there were 1 in 3 children who were orphaned. That means they lost one or both parents because they were equally vulnerable, whether they only lost one or both. And I had lots of relatives coming to my door asking for help. They needed help with education, food, a lot of things. These families were already probably the lowest of the lowest of poverty and could hardly feed their own family. And now they had all these relatives coming from the city bringing their children after they were orphaned to them. It was hard turning all those people away, and you just feel so empty when you say, "Sorry, I just can't help you, but I'll pray with you." Um, but out of that time, the Lord just said, "Okay, do something. Okay, maybe you can't help all of them. Can you help some of them?" One of the big needs there was for secondary education. Primary school, they could somehow manage, and it was less expensive. But secondary was unavailable for most. So we managed to raise a few little supports to bring some kids in. That was an act of obedience. We're like, well, we don't know what to do, what's the outcome going to be, just giving them school fees, what's the long-term picture. So we did in 2004, we sponsored 7 students into high school. Of those 7, though, only 4 graduated from high school. Um, One was a girl that didn't graduate because she got pregnant, because there was no security for her. 2 boys. One decided to, he got himself in trouble by impregnating a girl and got into legal trouble with that. And another one decided to run away and ended up getting married. And so only 4 graduated. And we could feel really defeated by that and say, wow, we raised all these funds. But God never called us to be responsible for the results. He only called us to do what we could do. Of those 4, though, one had a real big problem with stuttering. And he wasn't considered very well in his family and that disability, but we kept feeding into him and doing some mentoring, and he ended up graduating, and he embraced the values that we gave to him, and he's living a life of integrity for his family and supporting his family who didn't value him as a child. He went on and got some training after he finished high school. Another one that's been kind of a special one, become a son in the ministry to us. Goodwill came and there's a long story and I won't tell you because we don't have time. But he came, probably was the most challenged, and yet he just soaked it in. Nobody had fed into his life. He had had to raise his own school fees from being a primary school student by fishing and hunting. And he managed to put himself through primary school, and he got all the way to mid-high school, and they changed and cracked down on the hunting and fishing licenses and the rules, and he could no longer do that. And so he didn't know how he was going to do that. but we managed to contact him, or he contacted us, and we took him on. And when he was in his last year, we sent him to a camp from with Teen Mission. He found the Lord, got really excited, and he graduated well. Even though his best friend who brought him in is one of the ones that ran away, and he decided to go on for discipleship training after that. Spent 2 years with Teen Mission, and now he, on his own, he married, and he and his wife have developed a farm. They were granted land, and they are raising 25 orphans in their own home, in addition to their own 6 children, and educating 250 other orphan kids. They built the school on their own by raising funds from the land. So we could look at that failure in 2004 and say only 4 out of 7 graduated. And it does break our heart for those 3 that didn't. But look at the ones that did. And we are not responsible for the results, just to be obedient.
Thank you. Okay, so got 2 other principles for effective ministry. I don't know that there's time to share all those stories. One is that it isn't the work of Christ if it doesn't come from the heart of Christ. I had a friend recently tell me compassion is the gateway to ministry. You can do good things, but for the wrong reason. If we are the body of Christ, just because we're in his body doesn't mean we're doing his work. If it doesn't come from his heart, it's not his work. And the last one is that ministry is about people, not programs. We got stories for both of these. How many stories do you want to hear, or do I need to wrap it up? Both of them? Okay. Praise God. Thank you for grace. All right. So it isn't the work of Christ if it doesn't come from the heart of Christ.
This is a hard one to make short, but let me try. I'll call her name Ruth. That's not her real name. She was saved back in 1999 after her first husband died, and she became concerned about her own eternal destiny. But nothing much changed, and her church was not very helpful when they learned she had TB and HIV. She was shunned and not wanted, and they thought she was cursed. So, but she completed her TB treatment. She was still getting sick often. She didn't know she had HIV then. She just knew she had TB. And she went to a witch doctor because the church wouldn't help her. And so uh, the usual medical routes weren't available to her. So she went to a witch doctor, said she was bewitched. And so he did his treatments. She didn't get better. She ended up having to move to a slum. She had to leave her community. And she didn't even have a proper door to protect her. By that time, she was very poor, had nothing going on for her in her life. She became bedfast. She started losing her sight because of not having treated HIV. She was raped repeatedly by men she could not see or defend herself from at night because she had no way to protect herself and nobody to protect her. She began wishing for death. That was better to her. Somehow, in the midst of this, Martha, a very godly lady in the same slum, learned about Ruth. And she went and visited her in her home. She brought food and encouragement. She prayed with her. She helped her access good medical care and treatment. Martha didn't just preach the gospel, she demonstrated it. In time, Ruth responded, and with good health care and better food, she became stronger. Her health returned. And because of the love she received from Martha, she began to think, well, maybe I could go to Martha's church. Maybe I can again think about the church. So she came and she found Christ, and then she became active in helping others. That's the power of the gospel when it comes from not being an object of ministry. However, Ruth did not have very good things to say about most AIDS programs because during that time when she was going downhill, she saw many faith-based programs coming and going. And she said they just benefit the donors and those who implement those programs. Many churches make promises, but they do nothing. She says some leaders are corrupt. They live in nice houses and drive nice cars, getting rich off of funded programs. The challenge is to be like Martha. She wasn't a program, she was one person living out the gospel. It's a challenge to be the hands and feet of Jesus as we help those people in need.
What speaks to me out of that story is that Martha didn't begin by preaching the gospel. She began by living the gospel. And that's ultimately what brought Ruth to faith in Jesus Christ.
By the way, Martha was very impoverished herself. She had no income either. She was living in a slum and struggling for existence. Whatever she got, she shared.
So the last principle to share, as I said, there are more principles than these, but to point out what we've learned from our own experiences is that ministry is about people. It's not about programs. It's about people.
Wow, we could think of a lot of stories, but let me just tell you about one real quick one. A couple of years ago, I got a phone call from a guy, and I'm not actually sure of his name. I think it was Reuben. And he called me up and said, "Do you remember me?" And he gave me his name, and I had to say, "Sorry, you'll have to help remind me how I know you." And then he began narrating his story. And he said, "My mother is Malibu." Then all of a sudden it dawned on me who he was. I'm living in central Kenya. And this is like 25, 30 years ago. I had known his mother. And I remembered the story then. And his mother was the sister of one of our midwives at Lugulu. And she'd asked me to go and talk to her sister, who was very depressed, and she was worried about her. And her depression was deepening. Well, her sister was the mother of 3 young children. I went to visit her, and she was just struggling and sobbing because she couldn't support him. She was selling vegetables for a living because her husband had gotten a head injury a few years back, and he'd never really recovered. He became abusive. He was actually in a drunken brawl when he got the head injury, so things were not good. And he had resorted to alcohol, and he was too abusive. She was trying to support her family. She had no land. She couldn't go back to her husband. She felt trapped. And so we just visited her. I spent one evening with her, helping her think through her life and asking her looking at, okay, what are the things that you have? What are the possibilities in your life? And I asked question after question after question. And I was running out of questions because everything was like, nope, 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 nope. We don't have anything. I was thinking, usually we can find some kind of ray of hope in somebody's life that they can tap into. But finally, after just about running out, she says, "Oh, yeah, my sister gave me a knitting machine." "Oh, a knitting machine. Yeah, it's under that bed you're sitting on." And, "Well, can you use it?" She says, "Well, yeah, I know how to use it, but it's broken. It's been broken. It can't be fixed." I said, "Well, okay, can I take your knitting machine with me when I go to Nairobi and see if we can get it fixed?" So that was the little thing. I mean, we're not talking about big things here. We're talking about little things. I took her machine to Nairobi. It just had to have a little part. We got the part, got it fixed, and I brought her back a few things of yarn and gave her the first couple of orders, and we helped her find a little kiosk she could work from, and promised to pay her rent for this kiosk for a few months while she got started. Well, that just gave her hope. And so she said, "Okay, we'll try that." And we sat down and figured out how to run a business and manage it and write down the record keeping so that you keep track of your money and learning how to not just eat all the profits but pour enough money in. She had enough knowledge. And so that was it. A very simple, simple act that I had forgotten about. I mean, that was like 25 years ago. And she came back to me 2 months later and had said, "Hey, I want to show you something." And she had a whole different demeanor on her face. She pulled out that little book that we had started. She showed me the numbers. She's, I don't need the rent for next month because I thought she was coming for more money and I was prepared to help her. She said, I don't need any more help. Look at, I've done this and this and this. And then this young man was her son. He says, yes. Reuben says, I was that 7-year-old that was sitting beside my mother when you talked to her. I mean, that's the only contact I had with this young man. 25 years later, he got my number from somebody and called me up to tell me the rest of the story, that his mother had been able to manage, and another ministry came in and helped her husband. And he found the Lord. They helped to reunite them. The husband became more active and learned how to help to support the family. And he and his siblings were able to go to school. He says, I finished not high school, college, but not only university, he is in his master's program at that time. So it's like you just never know where it's going to go. And but for me, it wasn't about a program. When I look back at my days at Lagulu, it wasn't any of the programs or other things. Yes, we got some building built and we got some things started here and there. But what I remember is people, individual people, where you have little, maybe only a little contact, like with this one, but that lasted. Every now and then I get a call from somebody and just refreshing my mind on that relationship. The time we sat and had chai, the time we went somewhere, the time someone was grieving and we just sat and wept together, the time we laughed. That's ministry. It's not programs.
Thank you, Hope. Okay. So let me finish just by presenting a few questions to leave you thinking. The first is God calling Friends Church of North Carolina to gather people to Christ? Very basic question. And if the answer is no, then what is he calling you to? But if the answer is yes, then what discernment process will you use to identify and reach out to those people that Christ wants to gather through you? What discernment process will you use to identify them? And then how can Friends Church of North Carolina equip and empower its constituent meetings to gather people to the Lord? How can the yearly meeting equip and empower its constituent monthly meetings to do this work of gathering people to the Lord? And lastly, who is your monthly meeting wooing to Christ? And if you can't really identify who they are you willing to spend some dedicated time in prayer, seeking the Spirit of the Lord to guide you and point out who He wants to woo through you? You can't woo everyone. We shouldn't expect to. But Christ, if we ask Him, He will direct us and He will empower us. We just need to be obedient, friends. Leave the results to Him. So the world is getting darker and more broken, and around us there are so many people who are hurting, who are isolated, who are suffering and trapped in broken lifestyles. Those who need to know and experience the good news of Christ's healing and redeeming presence. And Christ's heart yearns to draw them in, to embrace them, to heal them, and to set them free. Friends, Christ has placed His light within us, what are we going to do with it? Thank you for allowing us the privilege of sharing these thoughts with you and fellowship with you, which has blessed us so much. And we look forward to the rest of the day with you. God bless you.
Thank you, Bob and Hope, for giving us many things to think about. Thank you for sharing your stories and for your example of living the gospel. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to take a 2-minute break while we switch gears and get ready for our memorial service.